Okay, Mark. Well, to Lamar, to not to Lamar, that's not really the question here. Like, that's not the question again is, do the 49ers get aggressive or do they remain passive in free agency? And I realize that a lot of this is contingent upon the surgery on Friday that happens to Brock Purdy. But in my opinion, it should not be. Let me preface this by saying I do not believe the 49ers will get aggressive in free agency, partially because of how much money they have to spend, partially because how good their roster is, and partially because of the quarterback situation that although people may bat their eyes at, I think Kyle Shanahan does have confidence in. But they should get aggressive in free agency. That does not mean going out and signing Lamar Jackson. That does not mean going out and signing a big name free agent for top dollar. The most money they're going to hand out this offseason will and should be to Nick Bosa. However, I do believe that what we saw last year means that there is room for improvement, specifically in the trenches. And getting aggressive doesn't mean you have to hand out a 5-year deal. What it means is that I would like to see that money that people are hypothetically throwing around the quarterback position be invested into the right tackle spot, be invested into to the defensive line, even being invested potentially into a boomer bust member of the secondary. I would love to see the 49ers get aggressive for potential talent that can add to the depth and even the impact at the starting positions across the board. I don't think it'll happen, but to me, where the 49ers didn't necessarily strike out last off season. I mean, they went out and they got Charvarius Ward. That was a huge, impactful signing. I think that is not likely to happen this offseason, but it should because we can see where the 49ers have struck gold in the past before. And I think it could pay dividends this year, especially if it is at a position of need, which we saw last year in the NFC Championship, was on the defensive and offensive line.
No, I'm with you, and I would add to the defensive and offensive line, it's the defensive secondary as well. I know you mentioned Charvarius Ward, maybe not another top flight corner, but the Niners are relatively weak as well, and we've talked about this a lot. Emmanuel Mosley seems like it makes sense considering the Niners might get a bit of a discount, and they've been
According to
very
Nick
happy.
Bosa.
According to Nick Bosa, he might already be coming back. Yeah. But that could be an option there. But then the question becomes, okay, Jimmy Ward, are you going to bring back, who's going to be playing safety alongside Talanoa Hufanga? That's a real question for the 49ers as well. And there are a lot of really good players out there that fit those positions. I mean, you talk about on the defensive line, Javon Hargrave, who helped wreck the NFC Championship game in favor of the Eagles against you just, a month and a half ago or so. He's been really good for the Eagles. He's 30, but if you're talking about a shorter term contract, that could fit. Daron Payne, even younger at 25, a defensive tackle. He's a free agent from the Commanders. Offensive lineman, specifically at the tackle position, the Kansas City Chiefs made a little bit of news earlier last week when they decided not to franchise tag Orlando Brown. He's a right tackle. That would be a fantastic fit. But I mean, all those guys are going to cost a lot of money. I mean, they're good players and they're going to demand a lot of money, and there are going to be a lot of teams after them. So it comes back to the question, if you're watching along on YouTube at the bottom there, will the Niners be aggressive or will they be passive? I tend to think that obviously they're going to want to get high quality talent, but I'm not so sure that they're willing to shovel out all these gigantic contracts, and all these is probably an exaggeration. I'm not sure they're willing to even give out one giant contract to one of these top, free agents. We'll probably see them, maybe get a name or two from the second tier of free agents, not one of those big names that I mentioned. It doesn't seem to be the Niners' way generally to go after those big talents and be willing to give out big money. Now, we've also talked a lot about how the Niners have kind of changed their philosophy a little bit. You and I were both shocked they pulled the trigger on the Christian McCaffrey trade because it signaled really for the first time in the Shanahan era a willingness to say, F them picks. Let's go after this. Let's get the star. We have a championship window. Let's try to take advantage. So maybe that mindset is still in their heads and they're still willing to do that and say, you know what? We have a fantastic team. We need to put all of our chips into the middle of the table and take a chance. So maybe this is them, kind of changing their mindset and changing the way that they think about building football teams. And maybe we see that this offseason, but I'm a little hesitant. I'm not so sure we will see them be aggressive in the sense of giving out a gigantic contract. Maybe they make some waves and sign a handful of players, but some lower level free agents. But in terms of one of those big can't miss guys that's going to get a lot of money per year and a lot of guaranteed money, I'm not so sure that's on the table for the 49ers.
No, but I think that's also kind of the needle that they threaded with Charvarius Ward. Now, he was making, a sizable amount of money for a secondary member, around $10 million a year. That was, not an insignificant contract that they handed out. But a couple of guys at each of the spots that we're talking about that catch my eye, I would say one of them would be someone that, you're probably gonna have to pay. The other, to me, that there are some boomer bust prospects within this free agency class. And so if we're looking at first the offensive line, Orlando Brown is absolutely one that I would look at, but like you mentioned, is probably out of their price range. The Atlanta Falcons chose not to re-sign or franchise tag Caleb McGarry, who was quietly a very good right tackle last year for them. And from his PFF grades, looks to be pretty consistent, or at least is coming off a good year and might be an opportunity for San Francisco to sign it below, say, an asking price for Mike McGlinchey, who people are also considering the 49ers bringing back. When you're looking at the defensive line, that's where it gets a little bit more mucky. At defensive end, to me, someone like Marcus Davenport for the New Orleans Saints, who has had really an up and down career, even going back to college, would be a guy to potentially look at, along with the Arizona Cardinals, Zach Allen, who they chose not to re-sign and is going to hit free agency. To me, those are two guys that are not big, sexy names, but do bring talent to the table and I believe can play quality football if they're not asked to be every down 17-game starters. At the cornerback position, a guy like, I know he's coming off a good year, but he is 33 and potentially attainable, and that'd be Patrick Peterson, who is in his prime, pound for pound, one of the best cornerbacks I've ever seen. I know for the Vikings, he was kind of iffy down the stretch. Another guy would be kind of a local product, and it'd be Marcus Peters. He's coming off an injury for the Baltimore Ravens. That might be a guy who's willing to take a 1-year make it or break it type deal. And so from those 6 guys, to me, I'm not saying that they'll grab any of those, but to me, those are the kind of profiles that I think the Niners will be looking at and not be willing to offer, 4 or 5 years, but potentially a 2 or 3 year deal in order to, again, just bolster the depth of their team, which we saw kind of break down at the end of last year.
Well, yeah, I think that's probably a little more in the 49ers wheelhouse in terms of what they've done in the past. Like you mentioning some of those older veteran guys that have proven that they can play great football. Patrick Peterson, Marcus Peters both fit that profile, but they're on the back end of their careers. They've dealt with injuries. No one would say that they're at their peak. Generally that was the description for Richard Sherman when he joined the 49ers. Like they have shown that is kind of what they do. Like it's not a perfect comparison, but it does seem to be in that same sort of vein. There are other examples as well, not just Richard Sherman, but I mean, they have shown a willingness to go after some veteran guys who have proven in the past that they are elite players, but are over the hill just a little bit. You try to squeeze out 1-2 more good years max, and maybe you get a Super Bowl out of it. Maybe you get a healthy year out of this veteran who has failed to be healthy recently. And I know it's saying a lot for the 49ers considering they can't do that for any of their players, but that's the hope when you're going after players like this. It's similar to I don't know if you're trying to make a basketball comparison, like similar to what the Warriors did with Otto Porter in their championship season. A player who had been a quality player in the past, but has had some down years, and his market was down because of injuries. And teams generally don't believe that he can put together a full season of healthy basketball, or in this case, football. So I think that you're right. You're on the right track. That's generally where the 49ers have made their money in the past. And it hasn't always worked, but in the Richard Sherman example, that worked really well. I mean, he was good for the 49ers the year they went to the Super Bowl. Really good. Not at his peak, of course. No. I mean, he was playing after an Achilles injury. That's really difficult for a corner. But I think that fits more the profile of what the 49ers have shown in past off seasons. However, there is still part of me, Evan, that is wondering if the mindset, back to the McCaffrey trade, if the mindset of Shanahan and Lynch has changed, and if they're willing, may still look for some of those guys. Maybe they sign one of those guys, but then they're still willing to perhaps give out a little bit more money to a bigger name, a more proven commodity, a guy who they can feel more comfortable relying on because they know that they have a team ready to compete. I'm not convinced, but I wonder if there is still part of the 49ers, specifically Kyle Shanahan, that is thinking that way and therefore might be more willing to shell out a few more bucks.
Well, in that case, it feels like Mike McGlinchey would be the first guy you'd want to put on the dotted line, right? I
Maybe.
mean, he's obviously familiar with your system. I know he's not the best right tackle in the world, but he's pretty good. And like he's probably looking at a $15 million a year type of contract. I mean, for as crazy as that might sound to some, like he's going to get paid, whether it's because of the market or not. I mean, look, we were talking about how ridiculous it was that Derek Carr, Geno Smith, and maybe perhaps Jimmy Garoppolo are going to be making over $30 million next year. That's just kind of, I know this term's been thrown around a lot this week, but it's the going rate for some
Yeah.
positions. And I do think that if the Niners are, at least how I see it, if they're willing to pay for, like you said, a known commodity, I do think they would be more inclined as opposed to other franchises to look inward. And so that might include both McGlinchey and Ward to try and bring both of them back.
Yeah, no, I mean, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. I mean, I know we've talked about Jimmy Ward's comments as well. Seems like he might be a little frustrated and maybe wants to move on. I saw him recently, I think on Instagram. He liked or maybe he shared a photo to a story of him in a Texans jersey. Maybe he wants to reunite with D'Amico Ryans, his defensive coordinator. Who knows? It does seem kind of read the writing on the wall that Mike McGlinchey's time with the 49ers is up. And if the 49ers are unwilling to, give McGlinchey the money that he's going to be asking for and that what other teams will be willing to give, I'm not sure that I believe the 49ers would be willing to go out to a different offensive lineman and give him the same amount or more. Now, I know a lot of Niner fans aren't the biggest fans of Mike McGlinchey, but everyone in the Niners locker room seems to be gigantic fans of Mike McGlinchey. So if they're not willing to do that, would they be willing to give someone else a similar amount? I suppose, maybe the Niners aren't as high on McGlinchey as they've let on, perhaps. I don't know. I'm just speculating here. But if they let McGlinchey go, Evan, I'm not so sure they're going to turn around and spend more money on offensive tackle. If McGlinchey's gone, it seems like they're trying to save a little bit of money on the offensive line.
Yeah, definitely. And look, they got a lot of late picks coming up. I know that's not sexy to hear, but they have quite a few third through sevenths. I know they don't have any ones or twos, but they have an opportunity and they've shown that they can cash in on those late round chances, whether it be in the offensive line, in the secondary, even, of course, as we saw last year at the quarterback position. So
Yeah.
I do trust the 49ers to make the right financial decision. And it looks like they probably will.